Welcome to Mostly Mets, and today what I'd like to do is talk about the upcoming trade deadline. We're only 9 days away from the trade deadline, and the Mets clearly have some holes to fill. Now, yesterday there was an article that came out by Jeff Passan, basically giving the top 50 targets, potential trade targets in this trade deadline season. And the Mets were mentioned a lot in the article. Obviously, the Mets are looking for relief help, maybe a center fielder, maybe a top-level starting pitcher, and there was a lot of guys that the Mets were mentioned in regards to. And when it comes to relief pitching, it's going to be tough this season because all the top teams are looking for relievers. And we don't know exactly who's available, but there are some top guys who it's possible could be available. Whether it's Johan Duran from the Twins, Jeff Passan gives him a 40% chance of being moved, and along with the Mets, he has the Dodgers, Phillies, Yankees, Cubs, Tigers, and Rangers in the mix for him. So to get a guy like that, especially when there's a less than 50% chance, you're going to have to give up a lot to get a guy like that, and you're going to be competing against all of these top teams with good farm systems. It's going to be tough to get a guy like that, but if you can, you do it. Because Duran is the type of guy, he has 2 more years of control, he's a really good closer, one of the best closers in baseball, and he'd really be asked to be your 8th inning guy. And with the uncertainty regarding Diaz going forward, as he could be potentially a free agent after this season, you need a guy who you can count on to be there past this season, and Duran is that type of guy. He has 2 more years of arbitration left, so it would kind of be the perfect type of guy to get where he helps you as your 8th inning guy this year, maybe as your closer sometimes too if Diaz needs a day off, and you have him for 2 more years after this one. So to me, that's kind of a no-brainer if you can make that deal and you feel comfortable with the haul going back. I think you make that type of deal. Another guy in that same type of category is Clase from the Guardians. This is a guy who has been a dominant closer in the past. I think he had an ERA under 1 last year. He had like a .6 ERA. Not as good this year, but he still has an ERA in the 2s. A ground ball pitcher, not really a super high strikeout guy, but definitely a ground ball pitcher who can pitch the 8th inning for you. And again, another guy who's under contract for the next couple of seasons and could be there past Edwin Diaz, who, as we mentioned, might be a free agent after this year. Another guy, closer, potential closer, 8th inning, solid relief. Really, that's what the Mets need right now. They need relief pitching and an 8th inning guy specifically. We've tried out Garrett and Stanek, and they've been very inconsistent. You get a guy like Clase or a guy like Duran, those guys could really solidify the back end of that bullpen and give you a huge boost and really help a team that's struggling in the bullpen. Then you go to the guys who are more of current setup guys. So Griffin Jax, they give him a 40% chance of being traded. He's still got 2 years of arbitration left. We saw him with the Twins earlier. He's a guy with nasty stuff. He hasn't performed extremely well this year. He's got like a mid-3s ERA, but his expected ERA is in the 2s. He's much better than how he's pitched this year, and another guy who could be a great setup man for you. A 40% chance, like I said, of landing him, but you also have the Dodgers, Phillies, Yankees, Cubs, Tigers, and Rangers as potential destinations for him. So once again, a guy you're probably going to have to give up more than you'd like to for a reliever. Will David Stearns do that? I don't know. But, at the end of the day, these are the type of moves that they have to make if they want to be World Series contenders this year. They have to go out and get some bullpen help. And right now, these are the top guys available. Another guy that was mentioned for the Mets was Ryan Helsley. He would be a rental. He's on an expiring deal. Passan gives him a 60% chance of being traded. Another guy, you're going to be competing with some of the big boys, Dodgers, Phillies, Yankees, Tigers. Like I said, he'd be a rental, so it's just for the season. You might not have to give up as much to get a guy like that, but as the Cardinals closer, he had a great season last year, struggled a little bit this year, but he's still having a pretty good season. Another guy, setup option, could really benefit that bullpen. And then another guy who's closing for the Pirates, and that's David Bednar. He would also be, he's arbitration eligible for next year, so you have him past this season. And Passan also gives him a 60% chance of being traded. Again, the same teams are going to be involved. Tigers, Dodgers, Phillies, Yankees, Cubs. It's going to be, there's a lot of top teams fighting for just a few top relievers. And a lot of those top relievers, like Clase, like Duran, might not get traded. At Clase, I don't think will be traded. Passan gives him a 20% chance. Duran, 40% chance. Jax, 40% chance. So Bednar and Hawley are the guys likely to be traded, and you're going to have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 really good teams vying for those guys. And to me, David Stearns doesn't seem like the type that's going to go out and trade the prospect capital that you might have to get a reliever. I just don't think that's what he's going to do. And if you watched his press conference yesterday, it seems as though relief pitching is the only area they feel like they need to improve in. He talked about center field. Could they get a center fielder? He said yes. They haven't necessarily been happy with Tyrone Taylor's bat so far, but he likes the platoon of McNeil and Tyrone Taylor out in center field. Tyrone Taylor gives you great defense, and he said he gives you those intangibles. He likes the secondary things that Tyrone Taylor does for the team, and he said McNeil's becoming more comfortable in center field, and he likes having them both be out there in center. I don't love that idea. I think that you're missing out if you're not able to go out and add a center field bat. I'm not even going to talk about the bats in this video because at the end of the day, I just don't think it's going to happen. Basically what he said is if he goes out and gets a center fielder, it has to be markedly better than what they have. It has to be much better than what they have. They have to be making a big improvement there to really go out and get one of those guys. And those guys really aren't available. The only guy that you could think of would be Byron Buxton, but his comments a week or two ago basically show that he's not going anywhere. He has a full no-trade clause. He's not waiving it. He said he wants to be a Twin for the rest of his career. I don't think he's available. That would be a huge swing. That would definitely change the trajectory of the Mets, but I just don't think it's going to happen. So the guys that you have available out there are Cedric Mullins, who, yes, he's a better hitter than what you have in Tyrone Taylor. He's going to give you more power, and he's going to give you good defense, but is he that much better than what they're doing right now? I don't think in Stearns' mind that he really is. He's not a game changer in center field. He's not a game-changing bat. He's just better than what they have, but not that much better. So you're talking about Harrison Bader and, lower level guys. Stearns isn't going to go out there and make a deal because it doesn't make the team that much better. And he basically said that yesterday. And there was reports that basically said starting pitching wise, the Mets are only going to be going after a guy if they feel like they can get a top of the rotation guy who will start playoff games for them. That's the only way they'd be interested in a starting pitcher. They're not necessarily going for the Mitch Kellers of the world or just the bottom end kind of guys. Edward Cabrera to me is an interesting guy because it seems like maybe he's coming into his own. He was a good prospect who kind of struggled early on in his career, and it seems like he's putting it together now. So that could be a name to watch, but I just don't see them doing anything, whether it's center field, DH, or starting pitcher-wise. They had the Mets. Passan had the Mets linked to Luis Severino and a couple of other guys. Taj Bradley. I just don't think those are the deals the Mets make. Maybe Taj Bradley because I don't think he costs you very much. He's still only like 24 years old. A lot of upside there. You probably wouldn't have to give up too much to get him. Maybe that's a guy that the Mets kind of go after in a hybrid reliever starting role. That's a possibility. But I think it would be those type of moves in the rotation. And with a bat, I just don't think they're really in the market. So I think we're really focused on relief pitchers here. And it's really the guys that I talked about are the main pieces that the Mets could be going after. He also talked about, he didn't necessarily put percentage that they're going to be traded or what teams will be interested in, but he put some other relievers in the top 50. You talk about Dennis Santana from Pittsburgh is having a really good year. That's definitely a name that I would watch for the Mets. Maybe if you go after Bednar, you'd get Santana as well, give up a little bit more in that package. Kyle Finnegan from Washington, not a name that excites you, but a solid middle reliever. Chris Martin from Texas, Phil Maton, no thank you for the Cardinals, Emilio Pagan from the Reds, Jake Bird from Colorado. Those are all kind of guys that I think the Mets could be involved with just as middle relievers. Maybe they feel comfortable with Garrett in the 8th inning or Stanek. I don't, but maybe they do. These are guys that might pitch the 5th, 6th, 7th inning. We obviously know the Mets starters can't go deep, so you need as many good solid relievers as you can get. And right now the Mets don't have, there's only a couple guys you really trust in that bullpen. Edwin Diaz you trust, obviously, at closer. You have Reed Garrett, who has been up and down, but I still trust him for the most part. Brazoban has been up and down as well. I still trust him as a middle reliever, but that's really it. I don't trust Stanek at all. I know Buto should be back soon. Don't really trust Buto either, but he is better than what they currently have. And now you add in Brooks Raley, who I think is jumping right into that circle of trust, as they say. I think they have the makings of a solid bullpen, but they need to add a piece or two to further. I really just think they need a setup guy. At the end of the day, if they can get David Bednar, stick him in the 8th inning, maybe a Dennis Santana in the same deal, that's a great. Now you have the makings of what could be a really good bullpen, because everybody slots a little bit differently. You're not necessarily counting on Reed Garrett in the 8th inning to get big outs. You're not counting on Brazoban to come in and hold a runner at second base in the 7th. You have better options in that scenario, and I think that would go a long way in improving this team. The biggest issue right now for the Mets, offense number one, doesn't seem like those guys are available, and bullpen. And if you can improve the bullpen, you do it. Now, one thing that did concern me a little bit is David Stern saying, listen, if the prices are too high and we're not able to make a deal for any of these relievers, we would consider bringing up McLean or Sproat to work out of the bullpen going forward for the rest of the season. I don't love that idea, only because I wouldn't trust those guys, right? I would have liked to have them in the rotation or in the bullpen a month ago, so you can build some trust in those guys. If they're coming in the 7th or 8th inning in a big game in August or September, do you really trust that those 23, 24-year-old rookies are going to get it done? I don't necessarily. I see a lot of top teams do that. They get their relief pitcher or their starting pitchers some relief outings first just to get them comfortable. I don't think it's the worst idea in the world. I just think it might be getting too late to do that. You need sure things. You need professionals. You need guys who can get the job done, who have a track record of getting it done in the major leagues, and those guys aren't it yet. I just don't know that I love the vision on that. But I do think that the Mets will add some relievers. Might not be the top guys, might not be Duran, might not be Clase, might not be Bednar, but I think they will add at least some lower level guys to this bullpen. Now, if you look at what these trades might cost, if you're talking about a guy like Duran or Clase, you're going to be giving up some pretty good prospect capital. Now, these are relievers. They're top-level relievers. They're closers. But relievers don't necessarily get as much value. Although these two guys do have more years left on their contract. This isn't a rental. This isn't a one-and-done thing. So you're going to have to give up some decent prospects. But if you look at what is being talked about as the Mets' untouchable prospects, I don't think you're going to give them up for a relief pitcher. So you're talking about Jet Williams, Carson Bench, Ilian Pena, Jonah Tong, Nolan McLean, and Brandon Sproat, I don't think are really going to be moved for a reliever. But because there's so many good teams going after these top-level relievers, if you're going after Duran or Clase, you might have to part with one of those guys. I would hate to do it. I think any one of those 6 guys, and I think I could just take Pena off this list. He's 17, signed for the biggest international free agent in Mets history, the biggest signing bonus. I don't think he's going anywhere. And you see what Carson Bench has done in his first, full season as a pro. I don't think he's going anywhere. McLean has performed so well in AAA. I don't think he's going anywhere. He profiles as a top-of-the-rotation kind of guy, maybe a number 2 or 3 starter, maybe at his height, an ace type of guy. And Jonah Tong looks like a difference maker in baseball. He's going to be a top-of-the-rotation type of guy. Brandon Sproat, we don't really know yet. He has struggled at AAA, but he's been better as of late. He's gotten his ERA down into the 4s, where it was way, close to 6 for most of the season. So I don't know what we have yet with Sproat. Jet Williams is interesting to me because I don't know where he plays, right? He's playing a lot of center field, but he's really a middle infielder. Maybe that's the type of guy that you can think about trading. I don't know. I'd like to see him in center field for the Mets. But if they don't feel like he can be a difference maker center fielder, maybe he goes out in a trade, because if he's playing middle infield, I don't know where he really has a spot on this team. if they think he's going to be a second baseman, we already have Mauricio, Acuna, Beatty can play second base. I don't know where Jet Williams necessarily fits on this team. But at the end of the day, I'm not a prospect hugger, but I would hate to get rid of these pitchers. Only because if you know David Stearns and you know the way he operates, he's never going to go sign a big-time free agent 30-year-old, 31-year-old pitcher. It's not in his DNA. He's not going to do it. So you need to hit on these pitching prospects. And that being said, I don't know that Jonah Tong or Nolan McLean or Brandon Sproat are going to be top-level top-level pitchers in the major leagues. But you have to have as many of those lottery tickets as you can if you're going to operate the way David Stearns does. He's not going to give out those big contracts. There was that article where, or I don't even know if it was a podcast or an article where Buster Olney was talking about Tariq Skubal and how he's going to be a free agent in a year and a half, and teams are already lining up, and it's going to go to $400 million, and it's going to be the Yankees, Mets, or the Dodgers as the favorites. I think he's completely out of line there saying that the Mets are not going to be involved for $400 million in a starting pitcher. They're just not. They'll give that kind of contract to an offensive player, to a bat that plays every day, who's young enough and who has enough years in his prime, like a Soto or a Lindor, but they're not going to go out there and get a pitcher who's 30 years old and give him 10 years, $40 million a year. They're just not. That's not in Stearns' DNA. He's not going to do it. So you need to keep as many of these pitching prospects as you can. The bats, to me, are guys that are much easier traded because they're willing to spend money on those type of players. And that's why I think like Jet Williams might be a type of guy that can get moved, but they're going to hold on to Sproat, Tong, and McLean for dear life. I think they'd like to keep Benj and Pena over anyone and those pitchers. But in a Clase Duran deal, you're looking at giving up maybe Jesus Baez, who's your number 7 overall prospect, a guy that has really taken a big leap forward, and he's only 20 years old, and he's a guy that, if you look at the prospect rankings and you look at the guys who talk about prospects, they really like him. They think he's going to be a star at third base for someone. But that's the kind of guy that you're going to have to give up in a deal like this. Maybe a Jonathan Santucci, who's your number 11 overall prospect. He's a pitcher. He's also a guy who's kind of coming into his own, having a really good season. And maybe one of, your young guys who's on the roster right now. So one of Beatty, Acuna, Mauricio. Maybe you have to throw one of those in the deal. Maybe even some lower level prospects as well. It's going to be a big deal to get one of those guys because they still do have a couple more years of control, and they're already at the top level of their game. So I don't know that that's going to be something that Stearns is willing to do on a guy. You might have to give up more. If you are in a bidding war between the Phillies, Yankees, and Mets to get, a Duran, say, you might have to say, okay, we'll give you Jet Williams. Instead of take off Jesus Baez and add in Jet Williams. You might have to do something like that. And I don't think that's something that the Mets are necessarily willing to do. That's why Stearns talks about, well, if we can't make a deal, we'll go with Sproat and McLean. And I think he's kind of setting us up for, we're not going to go out and get the top guys because it costs too much. And, whether we like that or not, that's his approach. And that's going to be his approach going forward. He's not that he's afraid to trade those young guys, but he likes to hold on to prospects a little bit. Maybe he would give up some lower level guys, but he's not. I don't think he's going to give up Jet Williams or any of those pitchers for a relief pitcher. I just don't see it happening. Now, if you talk about Jax and Helsley and Bednar, those are guys who could be set up guys for you. A couple of them could close. Helsley and Bednar are closers currently. Helsley's a little bit different because he would be a rental, and he's definitely having a down year compared to last year. So I don't think this would necessarily, you would have to give up this much to get him. But especially Jackson Bednar, who have a couple years of control remaining, a deal like Blade Tidwell, Drew Gilbert, maybe one of those major league guys, I think that probably gets it done. Helsley, maybe it's, Tidwell and Beatty, you know what I mean? that could possibly get it done, and it might not even be that much because he's a rental. It might just be Tidwell and a lower level prospect. I could definitely see that being the case, but you're still giving up some prospects here, but this is where I'd be more comfortable with. You're still getting a really quality setup guy and not giving up that much. We've all seen Tidwell. We see what he can do. He has really good stuff. I don't know that he's ever a starting pitcher in the major leagues. I think he's probably more of a reliever. Drew Gilbert, we've seen what he's done. A guy with some power, doesn't hit for a high average or on base percentage. I don't think he's necessarily a starter at the major league level. We'll see, but this would be more of a prospect, a prospect haul that I'd be comfortable giving up. I'm not a prospect hugger, but I like to see these young guys that we have and have a really good farm system, and you'd hate to kind of waste that on a rental like Hawley or a guy like Bednar. Jax is a guy that's very intriguing. I might give up a little bit more for him only because of his stuff. He has great stuff. I don't see them even making this deal, but this is where I'd kind of be comfortable. Now, if you look at where I think it's more realistic that they're going to get guys, it's in the Santana, Finnegan, Pagan kind of middle relief level. I think that they would be very comfortable with these guys. They're kind of rental, 1 year left, maybe 2 years left on their deal. And for these guys, you're not going to give up that much. Maybe one, top 30 prospect on the lower end of that, maybe your 25th or 26th prospect, and then maybe another lower level, an 18-year-old or 19-year-old guy that you just drafted last year or even this year, that's lower down on your prospect rankings, maybe in your 50s or 60s on your prospect rankings, because these are guys, they're just middle relief. They're not adding that much to you. Well, they are if you're the Mets because you need these guys as well, but I don't think you're going to give up that much to get him, and I think these are probably where Stearns is going to shop more, and I know people are going to be upset to hear that, and they don't want to hear that, he's going to get the bargain shopping Stearns and all that kind of stuff, but he's just trying to build an organization that has a lot of depth in the minor leagues, and you don't necessarily get there trading top 10 prospects for a closer. It doesn't always work out for you. How did it work out? I mean, it ended up working out for the Mets when they got Edwin Diaz, and you traded away Jared Kelenic. That didn't look like a great deal at the time. It looks fine now because Kelenic hasn't turned out to be anything, but right after that trade was made, Kelenic was tearing it up in the minor leagues, and everyone thought it was a terrible deal. Or we end up in a situation where you trade for a rental in Javi Baez, and you give up Pete Crow Armstrong, and he turns out to be a superstar. So I don't think he's going to do that for a rental. He's going to give up lower level guys. He's not going to go crazy. It's just the way he operates. And whether you like it or not, that's the way it's always going to be with him. Unless David Stearns will go after someone if he really believes they're a superstar or they're ready to unlock something or they're young enough. Maybe they're 25, 26 years old and they haven't quite unlocked something and he thinks he can unlock them. That's when he'll go and make a deal and give up some good prospects. But he's not going to do it just for anyone. And I think this trade deadline is tough because there's so many teams that are still in it. There's a lot of relief pitchers out there, but there's not a ton of, impact relievers, guys who are going to give you solid, A-plus stuff in the 8th inning. There's just not. There's a couple, but they're going to cost you a lot, and I just don't see him doing it this year. I don't know that he thinks that the rest of the roster is good enough to win a World Series, so why go out there and give up these top prospects, especially guys who you think could help you next year or even late this year if you have an injury. I don't see him making that type of deal. But maybe I'm wrong. I could be. Listen, I'm not an expert. I don't work in the front office. I don't know everything. This is just my opinion, what I think is going to happen. And also, when I'm talking about these players going back in a trade, it could be anyone kind of within those margins. I'm talking about the 7th and 11th prospect for Clase or Duren. I'm talking about the 14th and 9th best prospect for those middle, those good setup guys, and then the lower level, bottom end of top 30 for those other guys mentioned. So overall, I don't expect this to be a crazy trade deadline. I just don't. Maybe a week or two ago I did. I thought we were going to go out and add maybe a Cedric Mullins or a big bat. But after hearing Stearns, I just don't see that happening. I don't think he's going to see Mullins as enough of an upgrade to really go out and get him. I just don't. I also don't think Buxton's available, and I don't see a lot of great. I don't think he's looking for a DH at this point either. I think he's perfectly comfortable with having, Mauricio or Beatty or, Vientos or Winker when he's back, Marte when he's back, being in that spot depending on who's playing what positions. I think he said basically yesterday he likes the way the lineup is constructed. They just haven't necessarily done what they're supposed to do. But having Alvarez back now after his big double last night, the Mets have a big win. I think he's, in his mind, they're one hit away, one game away, one nice winning streak away from really locking in and becoming a good offense. So I don't think he's going to add there. Starting pitcher-wise, I think he's comfortable with what they have. Unless they can go out and get a top-of-the-line guy, they're not going to do it. Relief pitching is where they're going to be shopping. And unfortunately, I still don't think it's going to be the top guys. That's really all I got in terms of the trade deadline. If you like this type of content and you're not subscribed, please do so. Also, give me a like, comment who you think they're going to get, and if you like my trade ideas here. And until next time, let's go Mets.